You hear a story like this, and you think you know how it ends. You think you know the sound it makes. You imagine screaming, slamming doors, the shattering of glass. But the greatest earthquakes, the ones that truly reshape a life, they are silent. They happen in the quiet of your own soul. And the most powerful thing you can do, is not to fight the quake, but to walk, with steady feet, right off the map it created. My loves, come sit with Auntie May for a while. I want to talk to you about a map. Not the kind you hold in your hands, but the one you build in your heart over 30 years of marriage. You chart the routes of his commute, the schools for your children, the vacations you'll take. You know every contour, every landmark. And then, one day, you discover that the man you built this map with, has been living in an entirely different country. A secret country. For 15 years. The title of this story is true. He had a second family for 15 years. I packed one bag and left. But this isn't a story about his betrayal. That's just the weather that day. This is a story about the navigation. About what a woman finds inside herself when every single landmark she trusted vanishes. This is about the quiet, dignified power of saying, this map is wrong. I will now learn the terrain of my own soul. The knowing did not arrive with a siren's wail or the crashing of a door. It did not come as a scene I had seen in movies where a wife finds a lipstick stain or a receipt for jewelry she never received. That would have been a kind of violence, a sharp and sudden tear in the fabric of my day, something I could point to and say there, that is the bad thing. No, this was different. This was a slow and silent seepage, a chill that began in the marrow of my bones long before my skin felt the cold. It was the faintest scent of a foreign perfume, not on his collar but in the air of our shared life, a scent that did not belong. It was the quietest shift in the atmosphere, the way the light falls differently in a room when a window has been left open in another part of the house. For me it was a Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday. He was gone. The house had settled back into its own rhythms the way it always did when he was away. I had my tea and the newspaper, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. It was a peace I had cherished for years, this space to be Eleanor, not just Harold's wife. I met Constance for lunch that day. His mother. We had a standing date, a dutiful pleasantry. She was talking about the children. Our grandchildren. Sophia and Liam. She mentioned a recital. She said Madison was so gifted, her little hands flying over the keys. And then she said it was a shame Michael was all thumbs, but then Harold was clumsy at that age too. Madison. Michael. Names I did not know. The world did not stop. The restaurant noise did not fade. The waitress kept pouring water into our glasses. I watched the ice cubes tumble. I felt my smile stay perfectly placed on my face, a practiced comfortable mask. I even nodded. I think I said something like children develop at their own pace. But inside, a space was opening up, a vast and hollow cavern. It was not yet filled with facts or images or rage. It was just empty. It was the void where a truth was about to live. I replayed the conversation in my mind all the way home. Could I have misheard? Could she be confused? Constance was sharp as a tack. She remembered everything. She remembered slights from 40 years ago with perfect clarity. She did not confuse names. She did not invent grandchildren. The knowing began there in the passenger seat of my car as I drove the familiar route home. It was a whisper so soft it was almost drowned out by the sound of the tires. On the pavement. Something is wrong. That whisper is the first and most critical moment. That is the crossroads. You can choose to turn the radio up. You can choose to tell yourself you are being silly, paranoid that mothers get confused all the time. You can decide to bury that whisper under a mountain of reasonable explanations. Or you can choose to listen. To truly listen. To let that quiet, awful sound become the only thing you can hear. I listened. And because I listened, everything I saw afterwards was through this new lens, a lens of quiet suspicion. It was not frantic. It was observational. I became a student of my own life. I noticed things that had always been there, but now they wore a different costume. The business trips that sometimes stretched into Saturday morning. The new casual clothes he had bought for himself, clothes I would never have chosen for him, a style that seemed younger. The way he had become protective of his phone, placing it face down with a new kind of deliberate care. The increased life insurance policy he had insisted on 2 years ago. For your peace of mind, Ellie, he had said. The charitable donations to a youth soccer league in a city I had never heard of. Each piece was nothing. A scrap of paper. A casual phrase. A line on a bank statement. Alone they were meaningless. But once the whisper had tuned my ear, they began to form a melody. A song I had never wanted to learn. I would lie in our bed in the dark and feel the space beside me. I had always thought of it as empty. Now I wondered if it was simply vacated. I wondered where his mind was when his body was here. I wondered what he was thinking when he looked at me. Was he comparing? Was he counting the minutes until he could leave again? Was my face a reminder of a duty while another face represented a desire? The most profound pain in this phase was not the pain of betrayal itself. It was the pain of my own complicity. The pain of remembering all the times I had smoothed things over. All the times I had given him the benefit of the doubt. All the times I had made excuses to my friends, to my children, to myself. He's under so much pressure. The travel is hard on him. He's just distant sometimes. I had been the chief architect of the plausible deniability that had allowed this other life to grow. I had handed him the tools to build his secret world by refusing to see the shadows in our own. The whisper became a hum, a constant low frequency in the background of everything. It was there when I made his favorite meal. It was there when we watched television in silence. It was there in the polite kiss he gave me on his way out the door. Keep the home fires burning, Ellie. I began to hear the condescension in that phrase for the first time. It was not an endearment. It was an instruction. Stay here, be the constant, tend to the hearth, so I am free to go and build another fire somewhere else. I did not cry, not yet. The tears would come later in a different kind of silence. This was a time of dry-eyed witnessing. It was as if I had stepped outside of my own body and was watching a play titled A Good Marriage. I saw the actress playing me saying her lines, going through her motions. And I saw the actor playing him, performing his role with a chilling professionalism. But I could now see the cracks in the makeup. I could see the flicker of his eyes toward the clock. I could hear the slight hesitation in his stories. I could feel the emotional calculation behind his gestures. The irony was that our marriage seemed to improve in those last few weeks of my not knowing for certain. Because I was no longer trying. I was no longer seeking connection from a source I now suspected was dry. I was detached. I was calm. I asked no probing questions. I made no emotional demands. He likely thought I had finally settled into the comfortable resignation he had always wanted. He mistook my silent investigation for peace. He confused my dignified retreat for defeat. And all the while the whisper was gathering evidence. It was in the phone bill with the same number called every Tuesday and Thursday evening for exactly 20 minutes. It was in the photo I found tucked in the back of his old address book, a picture of him with a child on his shoulders at what looked like a zoo, his smile wide and unguarded, a smile I realized I had not seen in years. I did not recognize the child. I did not recognize the trees in the background. It was a snapshot from a life that existed on a parallel track to mine. I held that picture in my hand. I felt the glossy paper. I studied his face. That was the moment the whisper became a voice. A clear, calm, terrible voice inside my head. It said, he has another family. It did not yell. It simply stated a fact. And with that statement the entire architecture of my life the past 30 years trembled. Every memory, every holiday, every quiet Sunday morning was cast in a new and sinister light. Had he been thinking of them then? Had he bought her a gift on my birthday? Had he called her after making love to me? The ground beneath me was no longer solid. But the remarkable thing was I did not fall. I stood there in the guest bedroom holding that photograph, and I felt a strange and unexpected strength. It was the strength of finally knowing. The awful paralyzing uncertainty was over. The question had been answered. The nightmare was real and now I was awake in it. And when you are awake you can make decisions. You can move. The whisper had done its job. It had led me to the truth. It had asked me to be brave enough to look at what I did not want to see. And in showing me it handed me my power back. The power was not in the confrontation. The power was in the knowing itself. It was the one thing he could not take from me. He could steal my time, my trust, my years. But he could not steal the quiet certainty that now lived in my center. He could not unspeak the voice that said, you know. So I placed the photograph back exactly where I found it. I smoothed the bedspread. I walked downstairs and made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared thousands of meals, and I looked out at the garden I had planted. And I began to plan my leaving. Not with drama, not with fury, but with the slow deliberate precision of a surgeon. The knowing was my diagnosis. The silence was my method. And the one bag would be my prescription. That is where it all began. Not with a scream, but with a whisper on a Tuesday. A whisper I chose to hear. And that, my dears, is the most important choice any of us will ever make. The choice to believe ourselves. The choice to trust the quiet voice within that says something is wrong long before the world crashes down to prove it right. That voice is not your enemy. It is your most loyal friend. It is the first and final guardian of your peace. I listened to mine, and it led me out of the labyrinth and into the vast and terrifying and beautiful freedom of the truth. The calm that settled over me after the knowing was not peace. Let me be clear about that. It was not the absence of pain. It was the presence of a singular and chilling purpose. I had crossed a threshold. The question had shifted from a terrible if to a concrete what. And so I became an investigator of my own ruin. An archaeologist brushing the dust from the artifacts of a life I had thought was shared. I did this with a methodical detachment that surprises me to this day. There was no frenzy, no tearing through drawers, no frantic scrolling through phones. That would have been an energy he would have felt, a heat, a disturbance in the force of his deception. I operated in the cold. I became a ghost in my own home, moving through the rooms with a new objective silence. I began with time. I looked at the calendar on the kitchen wall, the one with the pleasant watercolor landscapes. I looked at the trips marked in his handwriting, city names and client codes. I cross-referenced these with old credit card statements I retrieved from the filing cabinet. I looked for patterns, a particular city that appeared every 6 weeks like clockwork, a hotel charge that always appeared on a Thursday night. I noted the dates. I began to see the skeleton of his other life in the dry ink of financial records. There was a rhythm to it, a cadence. This other life had its own seasons, its own milestones. I realized he had not been careless. He had been consistent. His deception had the boring regularity of a commuter schedule. I moved to the study. His domain. A room of leather and wood and the faint smell of his cologne. I sat in his chair. I let my hands rest on the arms where his hands had rested. I looked at the desk not as a wife would look at it but as a stranger would. What is important here? What is hidden in plain sight? The locked filing cabinet. I had never asked about the key. It was his business. I respected boundaries. Now boundaries were a luxury I could no longer afford. The key was not cleverly hidden. It was in the small ceramic dish on his dresser where he emptied his pockets at night. Alongside pennies and golf tees. It was an ordinary small silver key. It felt cold in my hand. Inside the cabinet were folders, neatly labeled, taxes, insurance, mortgage, and then one labeled simply, CB, Cedar Brook, the town name from the credit card statement. I pulled it out. My hands were steady. My breath was even. I opened it. Inside was a mortgage statement for a property on Sycamore Lane. A homeowner's insurance policy, a utility bill, all in his name, and a second name, Chloe. The paper was crisp. The reality it represented was not a fantasy, not a suspicion. It was an address, a place where he paid the water bill. Beneath the documents was a small clutch of photographs. Not many. He was too careful for a whole album. But there they were, a woman with blonde hair and a warm smile sitting on a porch swing. The same porch perhaps of the house on Sycamore Lane. Children, a girl with braces grinning, a boy with a baseball cap pulled low. And him, Harold, his arm around the boy. He was wearing a sweatshirt I had never seen. His hair was a little longer. His smile was easy, unguarded. It was the smile of a man completely at home. I studied that smile. I memorized it. I had not seen that version of his face in years. I realized he had two faces. And I had been receiving the lesser one, the dutiful one, the tired one. This face in the photograph, this was the face he reserved for his real life. I did not cry over the pictures. I analyzed them. I looked at the background for clues. The make of the car in the driveway. The type of flowers by the steps. I looked at the children's clothing to gauge the season. I was building a profile. I was understanding the scope. This was not a fling. This was not a midlife mistake. This was a home, a parallel home, with its own rhythms, its own grocery lists, its own laughter in the kitchen. I was the shadow life. The Wednesday to Sunday obligation. The manager of the original branch while he expanded his business elsewhere. I replaced everything exactly as I found it. The folder went back to its precise orientation. The key returned to the dish. I wiped the desk of my fingerprints with a soft cloth. I was not covering a crime. I was preserving my advantage. My knowledge was my only weapon, and I would not let him know I possessed it until I chose the time and place. And that time would not be one of discovery. It would be one of departure. The next phase was digital. I did not touch his computer. I did not need to. The paper trail was enough. But I observed his behavior. I noted how his phone never left his person. How he took it into the bathroom with him. How he angled the screen away from me when he typed. This was not the behavior of a man with nothing to hide. It was the behavior of a man with everything to lose. I listened to his side of phone calls. Not the words which were bland and professional, but the tone. The softness that crept into his voice when he thought I was out of earshot. The slight laughter. The patience. It was the tone of a man speaking to his family. I began to check the call log on our home phone in the evenings after he had gone to bed. There were repeated calls to the same area code. Not long. 10-15 minutes. Just enough for a good night. I wrote the number down on a small slip of paper and tucked it into my own hiding place, the hollow of an old book on my nightstand. I never called it. The number was just data. Another point on the map I was drawing. All of this happened in the interstitial spaces of my normal life. I did it while the laundry was spinning. I did it while the pot roast simmered. I did it in the 5 minutes before he came home from work. I integrated my detective work into the domestic landscape so seamlessly it became just another chore. Another item on the mental list. Pick up the dry cleaning. Water the azaleas. Document the betrayal. The most profound moment of this entire quiet investigation came not when I found a damning piece of evidence, but when I realized I was no longer angry. The rage had been burned away by the cold focus of the task. What remained was a deep and abiding sorrow and a crystal clear clarity. I was not gathering evidence to confront him. Confrontation implies a relationship, implies a debate, implies a hope for resolution. I was gathering evidence to prosecute the case against my own former life. To prove to myself beyond any lingering sentimental doubt that the woman I had been was gone. That the marriage I had tended was a ghost. The facts were for me. They were the foundation upon which I would build my escape. I started to see the signs everywhere. The extra cash he withdrew every Friday. The presents that appeared for me that felt like afterthoughts, a scarf he would have never chosen for me, a perfume I never wore. They were guilt gifts, obligation presents, bought quickly on the way home from his real life. I found a receipt once crumpled in his jacket pocket for a dollhouse. A beautiful elaborate dollhouse. Our granddaughter Sophia was too old for dollhouses. This was for Madison. I smoothed the receipt and looked at the price. It was extravagant. He had never been extravagant with us. We were practical. We saved. For his other family he was a provider of magic. I began to understand the economy of his heart. We got the leftovers, the drained energy, the discussed practicalities. They got his enthusiasm, his playfulness, his open wallet. We got the husband. They got the man. This understanding did not shatter me. It fortified me. It removed the last vestige of hope. It made my path forward not a tragic retreat but a strategic redeployment of my own life force. The final piece was the timeline. Sitting at the kitchen table one afternoon with a notepad, I worked it backwards. Using the children's ages in the photographs, using the date on the mortgage document. I pinpointed the approximate beginning. 15 years. It started around the time my mother died. The year I was folded into a grief so thick I could barely see. He was my comfort then. Or so I thought. He held me while I cried. He took care of the arrangements. And all the while he was laying the foundation for this other life. Using my vulnerability, my distraction as the perfect cover. The cruelty of that timing was not lost on me. It was the masterstroke of his deception. He had built his second family in the shadow of my first great loss. When I closed the notepad I was done. The investigation was complete. I had the names. I had the places. I had the timeline. I had the financial footprint. I had seen the smiling photographs. I knew the story in its cold and complete detail. There were no more mysteries to solve. No more whispers to chase. I stood up and put the notepad in my purse. I made dinner. We ate in our usual silence. I looked at him across the table. I saw the lines on his face, the way he chewed his food, the familiar slope of his shoulders. I knew him, and I knew the stranger who lived inside him. The man who could partition his heart so completely. The calm I felt was absolute. It was the calm of a prisoner who has just finished digging the tunnel. The final wall between captivity and freedom is just dirt now. All that remains is the quiet push into the open air. My detective work was over. I had convicted our marriage in the court of my own mind. The sentence was not his to give. It was mine to enact. And I would do it with the same quiet precision with which I had uncovered the crime. Without a sound, without a trace, leaving behind only the undeniable evidence of my absence. The grief did not come for him. Not at first. The shock, the investigation, the cold assembly of facts, all of that built a dam. It held back the vast ocean of feeling that threatened to drown me. I was a fortress of purpose. But once the purpose was achieved, once I knew everything there was to know, the fortress gates had to open. And what washed in was not for the man who left. It was for the woman who stayed. I grieved for her, for the woman I had been. For Eleanor, I had to mourn her like a death. Because she was gone. The woman who believed in forever. The woman who trusted the pattern of his breathing in the dark. The woman who saved newspaper clippings she thought he would find funny. The woman who learned to like golf on television just to be in the room with him. That woman was a casualty. She did not survive the revelation. The truth was a blade so sharp it severed me from my own past. I could look back at her across this chasm of knowing, but I could no longer reach her. I could no longer be her. I began to see her everywhere. Ghosts of her in the house. A version of me standing at the stove stirring a pot, utterly unaware of the phone call he was making in the next room. A version of me laughing at a joke he told, not sensing the hollow echo behind his eyes. A version of me picking out a birthday card for him, writing to my wonderful husband with a pen that did not tremble. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to shake her shoulders and point to the cracks in the foundation. But she was a phantom. She was already lost to time. All I could do was weep for her innocence. I wept for her time. 30 years, not the years themselves. They contained my children, my garden, books I loved, sunsets I saw. I wept for the emotional currency she spent. The benefit of the doubt she lavished on him. The excuses she manufactured for his distance. The way she shrank her own needs to fit the space he allowed. She had traded her curiosity for comfort. She had exchanged her suspicions for peace. And the peace was counterfeit. The comfort was a cage. She had paid for a beautiful painting only to discover it was a forgery. The loss was not of the object but of the belief in her own eye. I found her lists. She was a woman who made lists. Groceries, Christmas gifts, gardening tasks. Tucked in a cookbook I found one from years ago. It said, ask H about vacation. Call about gutters. Remember his mother's birthday. Her handwriting was so hopeful, so orderly. She was building a life brick by careful brick. She did not know she was building on sand. She did not know the foreman of her dream had already drafted blueprints for another house elsewhere. Holding that list was like holding a relic from a sunken city. The ink was faint. The paper was soft. The care she took was almost unbearable to witness. I grieved for her silences. All the things she did not say. The questions she swallowed because she did not want to be a nag. The loneliness she endured because she called it independence. The longing for a deeper conversation that she soothed with the thought he's tired. Work is hard. She had been taught that a good wife was a quiet wife, an accommodating wife, a wife who made a home a soft place for a man to land. She did not know that while she was fluffing the pillows he was building a landing strip in another county. Her silence was her gift to the marriage. His silence was the weapon that destroyed it. I had to forgive her. That was the hardest part. I was so angry with her. How could she not see? How could she be so blind? I would look at old photographs of us. Me smiling, my arm linked in his. I wanted to rip the picture in half. I wanted to burn the evidence of her credulity. But I came to understand she was not stupid. She was faithful. There is a world of difference. Stupidity is a lack of intelligence. Faithfulness is an excess of heart. She had too much heart. She poured it into a vessel with a hidden crack. The fault was not in the pouring. The fault was in the vessel. So I sat with her ghost. I lit a candle not for him but for her. I spoke to her in the quiet of my mind. I said you were enough. You were loyal. You showed up. You kept your promises. The failure of the story is not a failure of your character. I told her she could rest now. Her long vigil was over. She had done her duty. She had loved with the tools she had. And it was okay to lay those tools down. Letting her go meant letting go of the entire narrative of my life. The story I had told myself for decades. That we were partners. That we had built something together. That the wrinkles on our faces were a map of shared history. That story was my home. It was the air I breathed. And now it was poison. I had to evacuate. I had to stand in the blank empty space of I don't know who I was before I could begin to ask who will I be. This grief was a private funeral. There was no ceremony, no casket, no mourners. It happened in the laundry room folding his shirts. It happened in the grocery store reaching for his favorite cereal. It happened in the middle of the night when I reached across the cold expanse of sheets and remembered she would have expected to find him there. She would have felt a pang of loneliness. I felt a pang of liberation tinged with this profound sorrow for her. She never got to feel this. She never got to stand on this side of the truth where the air was clear and cold and honest. I gathered the artifacts of her life. The frilly aprons she wore for holidays. The fancy china she saved for occasions that never felt special enough. The perfume he bought her that she never really liked but wore because he chose it. I did not destroy them. I packed them away. They were not me anymore. But they were her. And she deserved a dignified retirement. She was not to be ridiculed or erased. She was to be honored and then released. She was the cocoon. I was the thing that had to break out of it. The final stage of grieving her was the recognition that I had betrayed her too. Not with another person, but by neglecting her, by letting her voice grow soft, by allowing her dreams to be postponed indefinitely, by telling her to be patient, to be understanding, to be the bigger person. I had collaborated in her diminishment. I had been so busy being Harold's wife that I had forgotten to be Eleanor's guardian. This was my penance, to finally become the protector she never had. To listen to the whispers she ignored. To act on the doubts she suppressed. To choose her survival over the corpse of our marriage. So when I packed my single bag, it was not just an act of leaving him. It was an act of rescuing her. The few things I took were things she would have loved. The soft sweater, the journals, the photograph of her parents. I was taking her essence with me. I was giving her a new story, one where she was the main character, not the supporting actress. One where her intuition was the compass. One where her peace was the priority. The woman I had been died in that house on Sycamore Lane long before I ever saw a picture of it. She died from 1,000 small neglects, a lifetime of quiet deferred. My mourning was the necessary process. I could not build a new life on the grave of the old one without first tending to the burial. Without saying the proper goodbyes. Now when I think of her I feel a tenderness, a distant compassion. She is not me, but she is my origin story. My before. I do not wish to be her again. Her world was too small, her sky too low. But I owe her everything. Her faith, her resilience, her capacity to love even when it was misplaced. She is the soil from which I now grow. I took the best of her loyalty and turned it inward. I took her patience and applied it to my own healing. I took her hope and pointed it toward a future she could never have imagined. So I grieved for her. Deeply, completely, and in that grieving I set us both free. Her to rest, me to begin. The most profound love affair of my life turned out to be not with a man but with the woman I forgot I was. And it started with laying flowers on the grave of the woman I used to be. The suitcase sat open on the bed like a waiting question. A simple dark blue suitcase I had bought for myself years ago for a trip to see my sister, a trip he did not take. It was not the matching set of luggage we owned. Those were his, bought for a life of coordinated travel, a life that was partly a fiction. This one was mine, unmarked. Unknown to him, it had its own quiet history, its own small journeys. It felt like the only confidant I could trust. Packing one bag is not about limitation. It is about definition. When you must choose what to take from a house full of things, you are forced to answer the most basic question. What is me? What is mine? Not what was given to me. Not what was expected of me. But what speaks the language of my soul. It is the ultimate editing of a life. Stripping away the narrative written by others to find the few true sentences you wrote for yourself. I did not begin in the closet. I began in the silence. I stood in the center of our bedroom and I closed my eyes. I breathed. I asked myself in the stillest voice I possessed, what do you need to survive? Not as his wife. Not as the keeper of this home. As Eleanor. The answers did not come as words. They came as sensations. The feeling of soft worn cotton against my skin. The solid grip of a good pen in my hand. The scent of a particular soap that reminded me of a childhood pine forest. The weight of a single piece of jewelry that held a memory of love before him. I opened my eyes and the room had changed. It was no longer a shared space. It was a museum of a performance that had just ended. The silk blouses hanging in the closet were costumes for the role of corporate wife. The elegant dresses were for the part of gracious hostess. The delicate lingerie was an attempt to play the part of beloved. They felt like garments for a stranger. They held the shape of a woman who was trying to fit a mold. I ran my hands over them. I felt no attachment, only a distant pity. I took none of them. I turned to the drawers. I found my oldest pair of jeans. The denim was soft and faded in just the right places. They knew the shape of my knees from gardening. They remembered long walks taken alone. I folded them and placed them in the suitcase. A foundation of truth. Then T-shirts. Not the new ones. The old ones. One from a bookstore that had long since closed. One a plain gray shirt washed to perfection. They were fabrics that held no performance. They were for comfort and for solitude. They were for me. Sweaters. I bypassed the cashmere he had bought me for Christmases past. I chose instead a thick cable knit sweater my sister had made for me years ago. It was slightly itchy and imperfect. She had dropped stitches. I had always loved it. It smelled of wool and love and a connection that had nothing to do with him. It went into the bag. A talisman of a love that was real. My hands then went to the very back of my underwear drawer. Beneath the sensible cotton and the lace he preferred, I felt the small wooden box. My private box. I had not opened it in years. I brought it out and sat on the edge of the bed. The lid was dusty. Inside was the locket my grandmother gave me when I turned 16. Inside were tiny photographs of my parents young and smiling. There was a smooth stone from a beach vacation with my childhood best friend. A dried flower from my mother's garden. A single pearl earring I had lost the mate to but could not bear to throw away. These were the artifacts of my pre-Harold self. The girl I was before I became a we. They were the archaeological evidence of a separate and whole person. I placed the entire box in the suitcase. It was my true treasure. I went to the study. Not his side. My small writing desk in the corner. I took my journal. The one with the marbled cover. The pages were filled with my thoughts, my observations, snippets of poetry I liked. A record of an inner life he had never asked about. I took my favorite pen. A simple fountain pen that made my handwriting look elegant. These were my tools for navigating the world within. They were non-negotiable. From the bookshelf I took only 2 books. Not the leather-bound classics we displayed. I took a battered paperback novel I had read a dozen times, a story about a woman sailing alone around the world. And I took a book of poems by Mary Oliver. Her words were a compass pointing toward the natural world, toward paying attention, toward a life of fierce and quiet wonder. They were the scriptures of the life I wanted to live next. Then I stopped. I looked at the suitcase. It was half full. It contained only truth. It was the most honest collection of objects I had ever assembled. There was not a single item in it that carried the weight of his expectation or his mother's judgment or the role I was supposed to play. Every piece was a declaration. This is me. This has always been me. The practical things came next. Toiletries, but only the ones I used for myself. The perfume he loved stayed on the dresser. I packed the simple lavender lotion I bought for myself. A toothbrush, my hairbrush, practical underwear, socks, A pair of sturdy walking shoes. A raincoat. These were not about identity. They were about the mechanics of a body moving through the world. They served the vessel that carried my soul. They were respectful but impersonal. I stood before my jewelry box. It was a beautiful inlaid thing he had given me for an anniversary. I opened it. The diamonds sparkled under the light. The gold was warm and bright. They were beautiful stones, but they felt like trophies for a race I did not remember running. They were rewards for compliance, for playing my part well. They were the currency of a kingdom I was abdicating. I took only one thing. A simple silver band my father had worn. It was worn smooth. It bore the scratches of a life of honest work. It would not fit my finger, but I would carry it. It was a touchstone of a good man. A reminder that they existed. Finally, photographs. This was the most painful curation. The wall of family photos in the hallway told a story of us. Vacations, graduations, weddings. A beautiful lie. I took none of them. From the drawer I sifted through piles. I found a photograph of my children when they were small, laughing on a beach, their faces pure joy. I was behind the camera. It was a moment I had created, a moment of pure motherhood untouched by him. I took it. I found one of my parents dancing in our kitchen on some long ago Christmas. I took it, and I took one single picture of myself. It was recent, taken by a friend on a hike. I was looking away from the camera at a mountain vista. I looked pensive, strong, alone. I barely recognized that woman, but I wanted to know her. I placed these 3 photographs in a simple envelope. They were my proof of a real past. A past of love that was authentic. I closed the suitcase. It was not full. It had room. But I was done. Adding anything else would have been clutter. It would have diluted the purity of the statement. This bag contained a complete person. A person who could feel comfort, who could record her thoughts, who could remember love, who could walk in the rain, who could find solace in poetry. It contained everything I needed to be Eleanor. The act of zipping that suitcase closed was the most powerful moment of my entire life. More powerful than saying I do. That was a promise to a future. This was a promise to myself. The sound of the zipper was a period at the end of a very long and complex sentence. The sentence of my marriage. I looked at the rest of the room. The beautiful bedroom set, the matching lamps, the curtains I had painstakingly chosen. They were just scenery. They were the set dressing for a play that had closed. I felt no ownership of them anymore. They belonged to the ghost of the woman I was grieving. Let her have them. The single bag by the door was my manifesto. It said, I am more than what was given to me. I am more than what was expected of me. I am not defined by this house or these things or this man. I am defined by this carefully chosen collection of truths. I can walk away from every material possession because the only possession that matters is my own spirit. And it fits neatly into one dark blue suitcase. It was not an act of poverty. It was an act of immense wealth. I was choosing my spiritual wealth over my material inheritance. I was trading a gilded cage for the boundless sky, even if the sky was unknown and frightening. The bag was not heavy. It was the lightest burden I had carried in 30 years because for the first time it held only what was real. It held no pretense, no duty, no false hope. It held only me. When I picked it up and felt its weight in my hand, I did not feel loss. I felt a profound and shocking freedom. This was all I was taking. And it was everything I needed. The rest was just dust. The rest was just the set dressing for a life that was no longer mine. I turned off the light in the bedroom. I did not look back. The suitcase and we walked out together. 2 old friends finally going home. The note was an afterthought. Not in importance but in sequence. The real work was already done. The investigation was complete. The grief had been endured. The bag was packed. My mind and my heart had already left the building. All that remained was the physical act of walking out the door. And yet a part of me understood that to leave no word at all would be a different kind of cruelty. One that would ignite a frantic, chaotic energy, a police search, a storm of panic that would inevitably pull our children into its vortex. I would not give him that. I would not make a spectacle of our ending. I would not allow my disappearance to be a mystery. It would be a statement. A cold, clear, declarative sentence. I stood at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared thousands of meals, where we had discussed mortgages and college funds, and whose turn it was to host Thanksgiving. The sunlight fell across its surface in a familiar rectangle. It felt like a stage. I took a single piece of plain white stationery from the drawer. My stationery. The pen was my favorite pen, the one now packed in my bag. I used a simple ballpoint from the junk drawer. This message did not deserve the elegance of my fountain pen. I did not sit. I stood leaning over the table. The words came not in a rush but as 5 distinct units of truth, each one a bullet aimed at the center of his fiction. Chloe. That was the first word. Her name. The name I had seen on mortgage documents and Christmas cards. The name that had lived in the shadows of my marriage for 15 years. Writing it down, giving it ink and paper, made her real in our world for the first time. It pulled her out of the parallel universe and planted her squarely in the wreckage of mine. It said, I know her. I know her name. It removed the veil, the secrecy, the power of the hidden. It was an act of unmasking. Madison. The second word. His daughter. The girl who played piano. The child whose recitals he attended while telling me he was stuck in a hotel with a faulty internet connection. Writing her name was the most painful stroke of the pen. It made a child real, a child who shared his blood but not my history. It was an acknowledgement of a life created, of birthdays celebrated, of a love given that was stolen from the reservoir meant for his other children. It was proof of time and attention diverted. Mikey. The third word. The boy on his shoulders. His son. The heir to his other life. The name spoken with a softness by his mother that day. Writing it felt like carving a date on a tombstone. It marked the birth of his betrayal given form in a human being. It was the ultimate evidence. An affair could be denied, minimized, explained away as a mistake. A child as a fact. A child as a timeline. A child as forever. A line break. A space for breathing. For the impact to land. April 12th. The fourth and fifth words. A date. The birthday I had calculated from the school records, the photographs, the subtle clues. Mikey's birthday. The date that marked the precise moment his other life became tangible, became a person. It was the anchor point of the entire deception. By writing it I demonstrated the scope of my knowledge. I was not reacting to a rumor or a suspicion. I had done the math. I knew the anniversary of his infidelity down to the day it produced a son. It showed I had not just stumbled upon a secret. I had excavated it. That was all. 5 words. 2 names. 1 name. 1 date. Chloe. Madison. Mikey. April 12th. I did not sign it. What would I sign? Love, Ellie. Sincerely, your wife. There was no signature that fit. The absence of a name was its own signature. It was the mark of a woman who no longer had a title in his life. Then I took off my wedding ring. The diamond caught the late afternoon sun and for a second it threw a frantic rainbow prism against the wall, a last burst of false beauty. The band was tight. It had not been off my finger in 30 years. My skin had grown around it, a pale indented band of surrender. I had to twist it gently, work it over the knuckle. It came off with a final soft resistance. The sensation was shocking. The skin beneath felt new, vulnerable, like a peeled wound. It felt air and light for the first time in decades. I looked at the ring in my palm. It was just a piece of metal and stone. Heavy, cold. It held no magic anymore. It was a relic. I placed it carefully directly on top of the words. I centered it so the diamond sat over the date, April 12th. It was a paperweight, anchoring the truth to the table. But it was more than that. It was the full stop. The period. The end of the sentence. The ring was the symbol of the covenant. Placing it on the note was the act of dissolution. I am returning your promise. I am handing back the token. It is void. The contract is broken by your actions and I am making it official with my silence. I looked at the arrangement. The stark white paper. The plain black ink. The cold glittering ring pinning it all down. It was a minimalist exhibit. It required no interpretation. He would walk in, perhaps call my name. He would see the ring from across the room. He would approach. He would read. And in the span of 10 seconds his entire fabricated world would collapse in on itself. There would be no room for lies. No space for explanation. I had not asked a question. I had made a statement. I had presented evidence. The verdict was my absence. The power of those 5 words was in what they did not say. They did not say how could you. They did not say I hate you. They did not say you have destroyed me. They did not say we need to talk. By refusing to articulate my pain I denied him access to it. By refusing to ask questions, I denied him the opportunity to craft answers. By refusing to accuse, I denied him the chance to defend. I left him alone in a room with the bare bones of his own choices. I left him to converse with the ghosts of Chloe Madison and Mikey. I left him to stare at the date and remember the choices he made that led to it. My silence was the judge. My absence was the sentence. The note was simply the public record of the case. I did not look back at it as I walked to the door. I did not need to. Its image was burned into my mind. I picked up my single blue suitcase. I opened the front door. The evening air was cool on my newly naked finger. It felt like freedom. I stepped out. I closed the door behind me with a soft but definitive click. It was not a slam. It was a ceiling. I often wondered about the moment he found it. Did he stand there frozen? Did his blood turn to ice? Did he crumple? Did he call out for me in an empty house? I will never know, and I do not need to know. The power of the note was that it transferred the weight of the knowledge from my solitary shoulders onto his. For 15 years I had carried the ignorance, the bliss, the stupid trust. Now he would carry the full conscious weight of what he had done. He would carry the certainty that I knew everything. He would carry the image of that ring on that paper. He would carry the screaming silence of the house. He could not apologize to me. He could not beg for forgiveness. He could not manipulate or explain. I was gone. The only thing left was the truth sitting under a diamond on a kitchen table. He had to live with it. He had to sleep in it. He had to explain it to our children. He had to reconcile it with his mother. He had to face Chloe with the knowledge that the wife she likely pretended didn't exist was not a ghost but a woman of immense and quiet power who had just rewritten the ending of his story. The 5-word note was my final act of love for the woman I had been. It was the vengeance she never would have sought but the dignity she absolutely deserved. It was clean. It was sharp. It was irrevocable. It allowed me to walk away without a backward glance because I had said all that needed to be said. I had communicated with the efficiency of a heart surgeon. One precise incision and the diseased organ was removed. No screaming could have been that loud. No scene could have been that dramatic. No long letter pouring out my anguish could have been that devastating. Because anguish would have been about my feelings. And the note was not about my feelings. It was about his facts. I reduced 30 years of marriage, 15 years of betrayal, a lifetime of hopes into 5 words and a piece of jewelry. I showed him that in the end that was all it was worth. That was the final valuation. A few bits of information and a cold stone. And in that reduction I found my expansion. In that silence I found my voice. For the longest time I framed it in my own mind as leaving him. I said it to myself in the quiet of the car as the miles stretched out behind me. I am leaving him. I left him. It was a natural frame. He was the architect of the pain. He was the reason the house was empty. He was the shattered mirror. To walk away from that was an act of self-preservation. But self-preservation is a defensive move. It is a retreat. And somewhere along that coastal road with the salt air seeping into the car through the vents I realized I was not retreating. I was advancing. The compass was not pointed away from something but toward something. The language in my heart shifted. The sentence changed. I was not walking away from Harold. I was walking toward Eleanor. The distinction is everything. Walking away from him kept him at the center of the story. It made him the sun and my departure was just a planet-breaking orbit. A reaction. A consequence. But walking toward myself, that made me the sun. That made my own becoming the gravitational center. He became incidental. A piece of space junk floating in the rearview mirror. The journey was no longer about escape. It was about arrival. I arrived in a small town where the main sound was the gulls and the sigh of the waves. I rented an apartment with white walls and wide windows that looked out over a slate-colored sea. The first thing I did was not unpack my bag. I stood in the middle of the empty living room on bare wooden floors and I listened. I listened for his criticism of the size of the rooms. I listened for his mother's opinion on the town. I listened for the ghost of his expectations. There was only silence, and then beneath the silence a sound I had forgotten. My own breath. The sound of air moving in and out of a body that was finally unobserved. Unpacking the single bag was a sacrament. Each item placed in this new space was a declaration of intent. The old jeans went into a drawer, not a closet. They would not be hidden. The soft sweater my sister made I draped over a chair where the light from the window would touch it. The wooden box of my past I placed on a bare windowsill. I did not open it. It was enough that it was here in the light. The books went on the floor propped against the wall. A temporary shelf. There was no hurry. Time had become a wide open field, not a narrow track I had to run alongside him. I began to learn the terrain of myself. It was strange, uncharted land. I would stand in the grocery store and realize I could buy any food I wanted. Not what he liked. Not what was easy to cook for two. What did I like? I had forgotten. I bought a single mango because the color was beautiful. I bought the spicy peanut noodles from the hot bar. I ate standing at my kitchen counter watching the sea change color. The food tasted like freedom. It tasted like choice. I learned I liked silence. Not the silence of waiting but the silence of fullness. I would sit for an hour with a cup of tea and just watch the clouds move. My mind was not drafting conversations I would never have or rehearsing arguments I had won in the shower. My mind was quiet. It was resting. It was knitting itself back together stitch by slow stitch. I learned I liked my own company. I had feared loneliness. I had equated being alone with being lonely. They are not the same. Loneliness is the absence of others. Being alone is the presence of yourself. I began to feel a presence in the apartment. A steady, calm being. It was me, the woman who had been crowded out by the noise of his life, his needs, his secret. She was taking up space. She was breathing deep. I got the job at the bookstore. It was not for the money, though I needed it. It was for the smell of paper. For the quiet conversations with strangers about stories. For the rhythm of stacking and alphabetizing. For the simple tangible truth of a task completed. No one knew my history. I was Eleanor, the new woman, the one with the quiet eyes who always knew where to find the poetry section. I began to remember that I had always loved poetry. That I had written some once in a notebook a lifetime ago. That part of me had not died. It had just been sleeping. Walking toward myself meant listening to the smallest whispers of preference. I liked the window open at night even when it was cold. I liked to drink my coffee black. I liked to go to bed early and read with a single lamp on. I liked the color of geraniums in a clay pot. These were not grand discoveries. They were the rediscovery of a fingerprint. The unique pattern of a soul. It also meant facing the broken parts. The parts that still jumped when the phone rang. The parts that felt a pang on a Tuesday evening out of ancient habit. The parts that doubted this new quiet life was allowed. I would sit with those parts. I would not shush them or stuff them back down. I would say, I see you. You were afraid, but we are safe now. I became my own protector. My own gentle parent. The love I had poured into a leaky vessel for 30 years I now poured into my own cracked foundation. Slowly, patiently the cracks began to knit. I bought a journal. A new one. Not the one I had brought. A blank book with sea blue covers. I began to write. Not about him. About the sea. About the old man who came into the bookstore every Thursday to buy a mystery novel. About the way the fog rolled and smelling of salt and pine. I wrote down my dreams. They were no longer anxious dreams of being lost. They were dreams of flying over water. I was documenting the birth of a world. My world. Walking toward myself meant releasing the need for his regret. In the beginning I had harbored a secret expectation that my dignified exit would bring about his profound remorse. That he would be shattered. That he would understand the magnitude of his loss. Letting that go was a final stage of liberation. His regret or lack of it was his business. It had no bearing on my weather. My peace could not be contingent on his pain. My worth was not a crown he could bestow in a moment of belated understanding. I had already crowned myself. The ceremony was quiet. It happened when I cooked my first meal in the new apartment and I said a blessing over it, not to any god but to my own hands that had prepared it. The woman I was walking toward did not need a villain to define herself against. She did not need a great love story to give her shape. She needed morning light and honest work in the company of good words. She needed the space to be quiet or to be loud all by herself. She needed to remember how to want something small and simple and then to go out and get it. Some days I would walk on the beach for miles. My body grew stronger. The wind and the sand were relentless companions. I thought of nothing and of everything. I felt the years of sitting politely in living rooms, of dusting knick-knacks, of making small talk at parties melt away from my muscles. I was being scoured clean by the elements. I was becoming elemental. I began to smile at strangers. A real smile that started in my eyes. I made a friend. Her name was Grace. She owned the flower cart near the bookstore. She never asked about my past. We talked about bulbs and pruning and the best time to plant dahlias. It was a friendship based on a shared love of growing things. It was uncomplicated. It was a new kind of love. Walking toward myself was not a straight line. It was a spiral. Some days I would circle back to grief or anger. But each time I circled I was on a higher plane. The grief was less desperate. The anger less acidic. I was not stuck in the old story. I was observing it from a distance, seeing it as a chapter, not the whole book. The final proof that I was arriving at myself came in a simple moment. It was a rainy afternoon. I was in my apartment. I had just finished a book. I closed it and sat with the feeling it left in my heart. I made a cup of tea. I stood at the window watching the rain blur the sea and the sky into one soft gray veil. And a feeling came over me. It was not happiness exactly. It was not excitement. It was contentment. A deep solid sense of being exactly where I was meant to be, doing exactly what I was meant to be doing, which was nothing but existing. I was not waiting for the next thing. I was not missing the last thing. I was present. I was whole. In that moment I knew. I was not walking toward myself anymore. I had arrived. The woman in the apartment, the woman with the sea blue journal, the woman with the strong legs from walking the shore, the woman who loved her own silent company, that was me. I had not created a new person. I had excavated the original one. The one that existed before the world told her who to be. Harold and his other family, they were a landscape I had traveled through. A difficult, treacherous pass through the mountains. But I was out of the mountains now. I was on the shore. The air was clear. I could breathe. So you see, the leaving was just the vehicle. The car, the road, the suitcase, all of that was just the mechanism. The destination was never a place on a map. It was a place in the soul. It was the rediscovery of a home that had been inside me all along. A home that needed no mortgage, no validation, no second key. A home that was complete with one chair, one cup, one quiet heart beating its own steady rhythm, finally heard. I walked away from a castle built on lies. I walked toward a small, clean room of my own truth. And in that room I found the only thing that ever truly mattered. Myself. Not as a wife or a mother or a daughter-in-law. But as a woman. Complete. Sufficient. And finally free.